That morning, as I made coffee, I thought about how ironic life is. My daughter believed she was drowning in debt, living off scraps, when in fact she was already free, not just financially, but on the verge of being reborn from the inside out. I sat at the table and, for the first time in many years, I felt justice being served. Not a justice of vengeance, but of transformation. That night, Veronica came home early. She dropped her bag on the couch and came into the kitchen, where I was watering the plants on the windowsill. There was something different about her face. It wasn't just tiredness, but an inner heaviness. "Mom," he began, sitting up slowly. "I need to tell you something." I approached and waited in silence. "I'm ashamed of myself." Her voice trembled. "Of how I treated you, of how I sold your things, of how I left you alone. All for a man who never valued me." I held his hands. "Daughter, mistakes are a part of life. What matters is what you decide to do after them," she cried softly, tears falling onto the table. "I wasted everything you and Dad built. I threw away the trust, the dignity, even our relationship. And now I realize that nothing is worth more than having you here. Despite everything." I looked at her tenderly. For the first time, her words carried not just remorse for the consequences, but sincere regret. "Veronica, you can still rebuild. You don't have to carry this shame forever. It only makes sense if it serves as an impetus for change." She took a deep breath, wiping away the tears with the back of her hand. "I'll change, Mom. I swear I will." This time, it's not an empty promise. And in that moment, for the first time in many years, I believed her. The next morning, over coffee, I decided the time had come. My daughter was no longer the same woman who had once coldly discarded me. Veronica was now broken on the outside, but rebuilt on the inside. And that was what I had been waiting for before revealing the full truth. I picked up the phone and called Jonas. "Jonas, it's time. I want you to organize a meeting. My daughter needs to know everything." On the other side, he paused briefly before answering. "Understood, Mrs. Margarita. Tomorrow, at 10 in the morning, in my office." I hung up and returned to the kitchen. Veronica came in shortly after, still drowsy, with dark circles under her eyes from the night's work. She made a strong coffee and sat at the table. "We have an appointment tomorrow," he said, trying to sound casual. She raised her eyebrows suspiciously. "Commitment, yes. I've made an appointment with a lawyer. He can help clarify your situation, Mom." He sighed, running his hands over his face. "I can't afford a lawyer." "Don't worry about it, daughter. We just need to hear what he has to say." She was silent for a few moments, fiddling with her cup. "Okay. If you think I should go, I will." I nodded, containing the turmoil within me. Tomorrow, everything would change. The next day, we arrived promptly at Jonas's office. The old building, with its marble floors and tall windows, seemed even more imposing to Veronica, who fixed her hair with every step, as nervous as a child going to school. Jonas welcomed us with his professional smile. "Donna Margarita, Miss Veronica, welcome. Thank you for having us," my daughter said, her voice uncertain. "But I'm warning you, my financial situation is dire." I won't be able to afford high fees. Jonas exchanged a look with me before answering. That's exactly what we're going to talk about. He handed her a voluminous folder. Veronica opened it hesitantly. Her eyes scanned the pages, first in confusion, then in astonishment. It says here that my signature was forged. That there is evidence of fraud. Does that mean I'm not responsible for the debts? Exactly, Jonas confirmed. We found documents that prove you were the victim of forgery and coercion. She let out a shaky breath, but then frowned. But who paid for this investigation? I can't afford it. Jonas remained silent, looking away from me. I knew it. This was my cue. I took a deep breath, preparing myself to finally tear down the wall of secrets I had built myself. Veronica stared at me, waiting for an answer I could no longer postpone. I rested my hands on the table and said calmly, "Daughter, there's something you don't know. Your father left much more than memories." "What do you mean, Mom?" she asked, her voice breaking. I signaled to Jonas, who picked up another, even heavier folder and handed it to her. Veronica opened it with trembling hands. The first pages showed property deeds, bank statements, and company contracts. His eyes darted from one line to the other, widening each time. Is this all in your name?" Slowly disappear. Enrique invested silently for years. He multiplied our savings and created a fortune without me ever worrying about the details. He wanted to spare me, and also protect you from the temptation of living solely for money. She put her hand to her mouth in shock. So, when I sold the beach house, she was still mine. I got her back, and the building where I lived with Mauricio, it was always ours. He never knew. Veronica dropped the papers onto the table, breathing heavily. "Mom, did you know about this all along, since the day he called me from the office, saying he had sold my things?" She looked at me, tears streaming down her face. "And you let me believe you had nothing? That we lived only on scraps?" "Yes." My voice was firm. "Because you needed to learn what no amount of wealth could teach." The silence that followed was so heavy that it seemed to fill the room. Veronica closed the folder with a sharp snap and looked at me as if she didn't recognize me. "How could you, Mother?" Her voice trembled. "You watched me cry night after night, watched me work myself to exhaustion, watched me believe we had nothing. And you remained silent?" I approached slowly, without looking away. "Yes, I was. Because it wasn't money that could save you, Veronica. It was the lesson." She stood up abruptly, pacing back and forth. "A lesson?" He laughed bitterly. "I lost everything. My dignity, my friends, even my health. And you call that a lesson?" "Yes." My voice was low but firm. "Because only then could you understand the value of what you despised." Tears were now streaming freely down her face. "I left you when you needed me most. I treated you like a burden. And yet, you saved me." In this strange, painful way, I held her hands, even though she tried to resist. "I didn't save you with fortune, daughter. I let you learn to save yourself." Veronica took a deep, sobbing breath, but her eyes began to soften. The anger was still there, but mixed with something new, understanding. It was the beginning of forgiveness, not for me, but for herself. Jonas, who had remained silent during our intense exchange, cleared his throat softly before interjecting. Miss Veronica, allow me to clarify something. All debts incurred in your name by Mauricio have been cancelled. You owe nothing. She looked up at him, still stunned. What? What do you mean? We were able to prove the forgery and fraud. Jonas opened another folder and showed the documents with official stamps. Legally, you are free. There are no banks, no creditors, no lawsuits that can still affect you. Veronica brought her hands to her face, as if she needed air. So, I have nothing else pending? Nothing, Jonas confirmed. He's starting over with a clean slate. She looked at me, tears streaming down her face again, but different now, not of pain, but of relief. Mom. I don't know whether to laugh, cry, hug you or yell at you. I gently caressed her face. You can do all of that, daughter. The important thing is that now you have the chance to rebuild. Veronica collapsed into my arms, sobbing like a child. And for the first time in a long time, I felt that embrace wasn't one of dependence, but of true gratitude. In the following days, I noticed that Veronica was different. She no longer talked about luxury or about reclaiming her old life. On the contrary, she seemed more serene, as if she had finally found her bearings. One night, while we were eating dinner, she put down her fork and stared at me intently. Mom, I've decided I'm going to continue cleaning. I raised my eyebrows in surprise. But, daughter, there's no need anymore. You're debt-free, you don't need to wear yourself out like this. She took a deep breath, precisely for that reason. Now that I know I can leave at any time, I want to choose to stay. Not as a punishment, but as a learning experience. I need to prove to myself that I can live with dignity, even doing things I never imagined. I watched her silently, proud and moved. The same daughter who had once thrown me out of her own home now spoke of dignity with a clarity that touched me deeply. Are you sure about this choice? I asked. Absolutely. For the first time, I feel like I'm building something with my own hands. I smiled, holding his hand across the table. Then do it, daughter. But don't forget, work doesn't define who you are. It's your attitude toward it that counts. She nodded, tears in her eyes, but also with a new glow, the glow of someone who was finally learning to live. A few days later, Elsa came to my house late in the afternoon. She brought a basket of fresh bread and, as always, a curious look in her eyes. We sat on the porch for tea, and she was blunt. Margarita, can I tell you something without you thinking I'm intrusive? Smile. Of course, Elsa. You were never nosy, just attentive. She took a deep breath before continuing. I've been watching Veronica. And she's changed. She's no longer that arrogant woman who left for Europe full of plans. Now, when I see her at the market or walking around the neighborhood, I notice humility in her eyes. A kind of gratitude. I held the cup calmly, but my heart raced. And what do you think of this change? I asked. Elsa clasped her hands together on the table. I think you accomplished something few mothers can. You made your daughter see the true value of things. Not just the value of money, but the value of respect, family, and work. I felt my eyes fill with tears. That was it. I didn't want revenge. I wanted Veronica to truly understand who she was and what she had lost. Perhaps, I replied with a slight smile, time and life are the best teachers. Elsa nodded and, with sincere affection, added, not just time, Margarita. It was you who had the courage to let her learn on her own. I remained silent, watching the sunset, certain that Roberto, wherever he was, also shared this pride. That night, when Veronica came home from work, I noticed something different about her posture. She was tired, yes, but there was a quiet dignity in every movement. How was your shift? I asked, as she dropped her bag in the corner. She poured herself a glass of water before answering. Difficult, but not as I feared. The other women were kind. Donna Maria, who has worked there for over 20 years, taught me some tricks to make cleaning faster. Smile. She seems like a wise woman. Veronica nodded. Yes, it is. She told me her story. Her husband abandoned her with 3 young children, and she was left to fend for herself. She said the job wasn't a dream, but it gave her independence. And you know what? She said there are 2 types of people in this job, those who never had opportunities and those who wasted the ones they did. I looked at my daughter, who was staring at the floor, thoughtful. And what did you answer? I asked. I said I had all the opportunities in the world. A family that loved me, stability, and that I blew it all by following a worthless man. His gaze was steady, no self-pity, just truth. And what did she say? I insisted. Veronica took a deep breath. At least I knew why I was there, and that already put me one step ahead of many. I felt my heart sink, but also swell with pride. My daughter was finally learning from her falls. The next morning, I found Veronica sitting at the kitchen table, surrounded by papers and notes. Her eyes were tired, but there was a new sparkle in them. Did you sleep well? I asked. She shrugged and smiled slightly. Almost nothing, Mom. I've been thinking about everything that happened. And you know what? These last few days have been the hardest of my life, but also the most valuable. I approached, sitting in front of her. What do you mean by that, daughter? Veronica took a deep breath, as if she needed to lift a weight off her soul. I finally understood what really matters. It's not luxury, it's not living in an expensive apartment, nor traveling to impress others. What matters is having someone who's by your side when everything falls apart. What matters is true love, the kind that never lets go. My chest tightened at the sincerity in his voice. You have every right to hate me, Mom, he continued, tears in his eyes. I abandoned you when you needed me most. I took what Dad left, treated you like you were disposable. And now I'm here, begging for forgiveness. I held his hands. I've already forgiven you, Veronica. What's left is for you to learn to forgive yourself too, she cried, but not like before. They weren't tears of despair, but rather of someone who was truly beginning to see life through different eyes. That morning, the phone rang early. I recognized Jonas's voice on the other end. Mrs. Margarita, I have exciting news. The case is almost complete. With the evidence we've gathered, your daughter will be released from all debts left by Renato. I closed my eyes for a moment, absorbing every word. It was the sign I'd been waiting for. Excellent, Jonas, I replied firmly. Then the time has come. On the other side, he hesitated. Time for what, exactly? Tell Veronica the truth, he said without hesitation. She needs to know who was really behind all this. Jonas agreed to a meeting for the next day at his office. I hung up the phone and took a deep breath. For weeks I had maintained the facade of a vulnerable mother, letting my daughter face her own ghosts alone. Now, finally, she was ready to listen. At the coffee table, Veronica watched me silently, as if she had noticed my different expression. Was that the lawyer? She asked, apprehensively. Absent, yes. He wants us to talk tomorrow, Mom. I don't have money to pay fees. I can barely cover my basic expenses. I touched his hand gently. Don't worry about that now, daughter. Let's just hear what he has to say. She looked at me with suspicion and hope at the same time. And I knew, in that instant, that the moment of revelation was near. The next day, we arrived together at Jonas's office. The old downtown building, with its marble hallways and tall windows, seemed too imposing for Veronica's condition. She nervously arranged her hands, as if waiting for just another stroke of fate. Jonas greeted us with his professional smile, but I soon noticed the gravity in his eyes. Donna Margarita, Miss Veronica, thank you for coming. I need to tell you right away, doctor, my daughter interrupted, distressed. I can't afford the fees. If it's expensive, we'd better not even start. He exchanged a look with me before answering. Don't worry about that now. I want you to look at some documents first. He handed her a heavy folder. Veronica opened it slowly, her eyes scanning the pages. As she read, her expression changed, first confusion, then surprise, and finally disbelief. This says that Renato forged my signature, that there's evidence of fraud, that I'm not responsible for the debts. She looked up, astonished. Is it true? Yes, it is, Jonas confirmed calmly. We investigated thoroughly. We found enough evidence to exonerate her. She slammed the folder shut, her hands shaking. But how? Who paid for all this? I wouldn't even have the money for an initial consultation. The silence stretched. Then I took a deep breath, feeling my heart race. It was me, daughter. There's something you need to know. Something your father kept hidden for all these years. Jonas picked up another folder and placed it in front of her. Inside were deeds, bank statements, investment certificates. Roberto's secret inheritance. Veronica put her hand to her mouth, unable to believe it. Mom. That means that I nodded slowly. Yes, Veronica. We always had much more than you imagined. Veronica slammed the folder shut and looked at me, her eyes watery and her voice choked. Mom. Did you know this all along? He asked, almost in a whisper. I nodded calmly. Since the day you called me from the office, daughter. She was silent for a few seconds, as if gasping for air. So. When I cried every night, when I despaired over my debts. When I accepted the job of cleaning offices to survive. Did you already know that you could solve everything? Yes. I answered firmly. Disbelief took over his face. But why? Why did you let me go through all this if you could have helped me from the beginning? I took a deep breath before answering. Because you needed to learn, Veronica. Money might solve your immediate problems, but it wouldn't change your heart. You needed to discover the value of family, respect, and self-effort. Her tears fell differently this time. They weren't tears of despair, but of painful understanding. I left you when you needed me most, he murmured. I treated you like a nuisance. And yet you saved me. I held his hand tenderly. I didn't save you, daughter. I just let you learn to save yourself. Veronica lowered her head, sobbing silently, while Jonas discreetly left the room to leave us alone. A few minutes later, Jonas returned to the room with a neat sheaf of papers. His expression was serene, but charged with importance. Miss Veronica, he said, addressing her formally, I would like to confirm that, from now on, you are completely free of the debts incurred by Renato. All evidence has been accepted, and the case will be closed soon. Veronica looked up with teary eyes, almost unable to believe it. So, I don't owe anything anymore? Nothing, Jonas said. Your mother covered all the legal costs and took the necessary steps. Everything is resolved. She turned to me, astonished. Mom. You did all this. And still let me continue working as a cleaner? I held his hand firmly. Yes, daughter. Because it wasn't about money. It was about dignity. You needed to discover the value of your own effort, the joy of each achievement, no matter how small. She cried again, but this time there was a different shine in her eyes. Not of shame, but of gratitude and respect. I'll never look at you the same way again, she said, her voice trembling. Not as the fragile mother I thought you were, but as the strong woman who taught me how to truly live. I felt my chest warm. For the first time in years, my daughter looked to me not just as a mother, but as a role model. That night, already home, I found Veronica sitting alone on the porch. The moon illuminated her pensive face, and there was a new serenity in her expression. Can I sit down? I asked. She smiled slightly. Of course, Mom. I was just thinking. In what? Veronica took a deep breath before answering. In everything I did wrong. How I followed Renato without question, how I sold our beach house without feeling anything, how I treated you like a burden. I destroyed everything Dad worked so hard to build. I touched his shoulder affectionately. You made mistakes, yes, but you're learning. That's what matters. She shook her head. It's not just about learning. It's about recognizing. I was selfish, arrogant, blind. And if I hadn't gone through all that, maybe I would still be the same person. Her eyes filled with tears, but there was no despair, only awareness. I need to forgive myself, Mom. And I don't know if I can. You'll succeed, Veronica, I replied softly. Because true forgiveness begins within us, when we decide to change. She rested her head on my shoulder like she had when she was a child, and we sat there in silence, gazing up at the starry sky. For the first time, I felt my daughter truly understood the weight and value of her choices. Days later, I realized Veronica was more determined than ever. She no longer just talked about regrets, but about plans. Mom, she said one morning, as she packed her bag, I've decided I'm going to continue cleaning. I looked surprised. But, daughter, you don't need it anymore. You're debt-free, you have a secure future. Why put yourself through this? She took a deep breath and smiled firmly. Because I don't want to go back to who I was. I need to finish what I started. This job has taught me more about humility and hard work than my entire previous life. I was silent for a few seconds, noticing the certainty in her words. This was no longer the daughter who sought shortcuts or relied on illusions. She was a woman who had chosen, of her own free will, to learn from her work. Are you sure you're not punishing yourself? I asked. No, Mom, he replied calmly. It's not a punishment. It's a learning experience. I want to feel like I've conquered every step of this new life. I felt a quiet pride fill my heart. Roberto would have been happy to hear those words. Veronica left the house with her head held high, and for the first time in a long time, I saw in her not just my daughter, but a woman who was rebuilding herself completely. A few days later, Elsa showed up at home with a freshly baked cake. We sat in the kitchen, as we always did, and I soon noticed her watching Veronica closely. Margarita, he began, cutting a slice of cake, I need to tell you something. Your daughter. She's different. I tilted my head, curious. Different like, Elsa? She smiled slightly. She's no longer the vain woman who went to Europe. Now she has humility in her eyes, speaks with gratitude, and even smiles serenely. It's as if she's finally understood the value of life. My eyes filled with discreet tears. Do you really think so? I don't think so, Margarita. I see it, she replied firmly. And I know this change didn't come just from suffering. It came from the way you handled everything. Few mothers would have the courage to let their daughter learn the hard way. I was silent for a moment, touched by his words. I just wish Veronica understood who she really is, I murmured. Elsa placed her hand over mine. So you did it. Now she looks at you not as a burden or an obligation, but as an example. I felt a sweet warmth invade my chest. It was confirmation that my entire silent plan had been worth it. One rainy night, Veronica came home from work, exhausted as she was, with an unusual sparkle in her eyes. She left her wet coat on the chair and sat with me at the table. How was today? I asked, serving him some hot tea. She blew smoke from her cup before answering. Tiring, but special. I met a new colleague, Clara. She started yesterday. She's scared. She doesn't even know how to use the cleaning products. I remembered what Donna Maria taught me and decided to help her. I smiled, proudly. And how did she react? Veronica smiled back, simply. She thanked me as if I'd done something huge. But in reality it was just a small gesture. Even so, I could tell it gave her strength. I think for the first time I felt like I could make a difference in someone's life without needing money. My heart warmed. The daughter who had once traded memories for possessions now discovered value in gestures of solidarity. See, Veronica, he said softly. This is dignity. When we offer others what we've learned through pain, we transform suffering into wisdom. She took a deep breath, overcome with emotion. Mom, I never thought I'd learn anything from cleaning offices. But now I understand. It's not about what you do, but how you do it. I looked at her with silent pride. Roberto would have smiled at that scene. One morning, I found Veronica still awake in the living room, staring at an old family photograph. I sat beside her in silence until she spoke softly but firmly. "Mom, you know what I finally understood? That true love isn't the kind that gives us everything right away, but the kind that teaches us to face life, even when it hurts." I looked at his serene expression, and saw a maturity there that hadn't existed before. Renato told me exactly what I wanted to hear. He promised worlds, illusions, ease. But you. She took a deep breath, her eyes welling up. "You showed me what I needed to learn." I held his hand, moved. "And what did you learn, daughter?" She stared at the photograph again, as if responding to her father as well. "That family isn't for sale, that respect is priceless, and that dignity is the greatest asset we can carry." I've messed up a lot, Mom, but I won't waste the second chance life has given me. I felt a wave of peace wash over my heart. In that moment, I knew that the cycle of pain was finally beginning to transform into hope. One quiet afternoon, Veronica walked into her house holding a crumpled envelope. There was a strange expression on her face, a mixture of curiosity and detachment. "A letter came for me," he said, placing it on the table. "It's from Renato." My heart sank, but I remained silent as she calmly opened the envelope. She read a few lines and sighed deeply. "He's in prison in France. He was convicted of fraud. He says he regrets it, that he wants forgiveness." I waited for her reaction, but she just folded the letter and set it aside, as if it held no weight at all. "And what do you feel when you read this, daughter?" I asked cautiously. Veronica looked at me with surprising serenity. "Nothing, Mom. No anger, no pain, no longing. It's like a story from another life, from a person who no longer exists." "Are you going to answer?" She shook her head. "No. Not because I hate him, but because I have nothing to say." The Veronica who believed in him died when she chose to start over here. A silent pride washed over me. This was the greatest proof that my daughter had been reborn, stronger, more lucid, more in control of herself. The following Sunday, I decided to invite Veronica to revisit the old beach house. She hesitated for a moment, but soon accepted with a shy smile. The drive was silent, each of us immersed in our memories. When we parked in front of the cream-painted facade, she remained in the car for a few minutes, observing. "It looks the same," he murmured. "But I'm not the same person who sold this house as if it were just any property." We entered together. The air had the same scent of sea air mixed with memories. Veronica walked slowly through each room, touching furniture, photographs, and walls as if to recapture every moment she had lost. He sat on the sofa where his father used to read and, with tears in his eyes, confessed, "Mom, what hurts me the most isn't selling this house. It's doing it without feeling anything, without valuing the memories it held. Now I can hear Dad's laughter in every corner, feel his presence." I placed my hand over hers. "He never left this place, daughter. He's in every detail, in every memory." We spent the day there, cooking together, tidying up, and cleaning up little corners. It was more than a visit, it was a ritual of reconnecting with our roots. As the sun set, we sat on the terrace, silently gazing out at the sea. And I realized that, For the first time, Veronica no longer saw that house as a lost possession, but as a symbol of everything that truly mattered. As the sun disappeared over the horizon, Veronica broke the silence with a new sparkle in her eyes. "Mom, I have an idea," he said, almost hesitantly. "Which one, daughter?" I asked, turning to her. She took a deep breath before speaking. "I want to transform this house into a temporary shelter for women who have suffered violence or who have nowhere to go. A place where they can start over, just as I am starting over." I was silent for a few seconds, overcome with emotion. I had never imagined hearing that from her mouth. "Veronica, that's a beautiful idea," I replied, tears in my eyes. "Your father would have been proud. He always believed that a house is only truly a home when it opens its doors to those in need." She smiled, and for the first time that smile wasn't one of convenience, but of purpose. "I can't erase what I did in the past, Mom, but I can use this place to make sense of the future." I hugged my daughter tightly. The house that had once been a symbol of loss would now become a symbol of hope. It was as if Roberto, from above, had guided every step up to that moment. We returned home late that night, still filled with the smell of the sea and the feeling of a new beginning. During the drive, Veronica talked excitedly about her plans for the shelter, as if every detail was already vivid in her mind. "We can use one of the rooms to welcome the first women, then organize simple workshops, sewing, cooking, even basic financial advice," she said, with a sparkle in her eyes. I listened to her in silence, my heart warming. This wasn't the same daughter who once traded memories for money. She was a transformed woman who saw value in acceptance and sharing. Arriving home, we sat on the porch. The cool night air seemed to bless our conversation. "You know, Mom," Veronica said, resting her chin on her hands, "I thought losing everything was the end. But now I see it was the beginning of something much bigger." I touched his arm tenderly. "Sometimes, daughter, you have to hit rock bottom to discover the strength to climb back up." She smiled, moved. "And I don't want to go up there alone. I want you to be by my side every step of the way in this new project." "I always will be, Veronica," I replied without hesitation. "Not just as your mother, but as your partner." In that moment, I realized we were no longer just mother and daughter, bound by blood. We were two women who had chosen to rebuild their lives together, on solid foundations and a shared purpose. That night, after Veronica fell asleep in her room, I sat alone on the balcony, gazing at the stars. The early morning silence seemed to carry a familiar presence. I closed my eyes and spoke softly, as if he were still there, sitting beside me. "We did it, Roberto. Our daughter finally understands what really matters." The wind blew softly, like a silent answer. I remembered her last words, her simple way of calming me, her faith that one day Veronica would learn from life. I felt a lump in my throat, but not from sadness. It was a different emotion, a mixture of relief and gratitude. I had fulfilled my promise to care for her, not just protecting her, but showing her the path of responsibility, respect, and dignity. For a moment, I had the feeling I heard his voice, serene as always. "I knew you could do it, my love. You are stronger than you think." I opened my eyes with a small smile. The pain of absence was still there, but now mixed with a peace I hadn't felt in a long time. At that moment, I realized we hadn't just recovered possessions or memories. We had rebuilt something much greater, a true bond, impossible to break. A few weeks later, we returned to the beach house. This time, not as visitors trapped in the past, but as women determined to transform that space into something alive. Veronica carried a folder full of notes and drafts. "Look, Mom," he said, spreading papers out on the kitchen table. "I've already thought of a temporary name for the shelter, and also a list of contacts who can help us. Psychologists, lawyers, even a craft teacher who volunteered." I looked at her in awe. Every word revealed not just enthusiasm, but purpose. We spent the day tidying rooms, measuring spaces, imagining how many women could fit there safely and with dignity. With each gesture, it felt like the house breathed again, as if it knew it would soon welcome new stories. Late in the afternoon, we sat on the terrace, watching the sea. Veronica took a deep breath and said, "Mom, I never thought I'd be able to dream again. But now, I feel like everything makes sense." I held his hand firmly. "It's because, this time, you're not dreaming alone. We're together." The sun was sinking below the horizon, tinting the sky with golden and pink hues. And I knew that this house, built with so much sacrifice and nearly lost to greed, would now become a beacon of hope for many lives. We returned home tired, but with our heads buzzing with ideas. Veronica seemed like a different person. She sat at the table with her notebook on her lap and began writing nonstop, scribbling down projects, budgets, and even possible names for the shelter. "Mom, we need to think about every detail: food, safety, activities. I want these women to feel welcomed, not just housed." I watched her with silent pride. Who would have thought that the same daughter who once traded our story for empty promises was now dedicated to building a home for strangers? "What about the costs?" I asked. She sighed. "I don't know yet. I can sell some of my remaining jewelry, but I want to try to get support too. I don't want to depend solely on you. I need to prove I can sustain this dream." I held her hand gently. "You're already proving it, Veronica. Not with money, but with attitude." She smiled, moved. "It's the first time in a long time that I feel proud of myself." That night, before bed, I tidied up the papers scattered across my desk. They were simple drafts, but they held something no amount of money could buy: the certainty that my daughter had found true purpose. As the weeks passed, word of the shelter idea began to spread throughout the neighborhood. Little by little, neighbors who had previously only watched us from afar began knocking on our door. Donna Elisa, the oldest neighbor, was the first. She brought a basket of fruit and said, "Margarita, I heard your daughter wants to turn the beach house into a shelter. If you need someone to cook, you can count on me." The next day, it was the baker on the corner. "I can donate bread every week. It's not much, but it helps." Even children showed up, offering hand-me-downs from their families. Every gesture, no matter how small, seemed to add more invisible bricks to the project. Veronica received each offer of help with sincere gratitude. There was no longer any arrogance in her attitude, only humility and a desire to build something collective. "Mom," she said one night, arranging donation boxes in the living room, "I never thought people would believe in me again. I looked at her tenderly. They believe because they see your change, daughter. When the heart changes, the world around you notices. Veronica smiled, with subtle tears in her eyes. For the first time, she wasn't just filled with regrets, but also shared hope. As donations poured in, Veronica began organizing everything with surprising discipline. She wrote down each donation in a notebook, made priority lists, and even assigned roles to the volunteers. Donna Elisa will be in charge of the kitchen, the baker will be in charge of the bread, and Clara can help with the sewing, she said, pointing to her notes. I'll take care of the cleaning and basic administration. I watched in silence, my heart swelling with pride. This was the same daughter who once couldn't even bear to make her own bed. Now she took on tasks naturally. Without complaint. You're taking this too seriously, Veronica, I commented. She looked up and smiled. Mom, for the first time I feel like I'm doing something that really matters. It's not just about me, it's about transforming lives. She picked up a box of donated clothes and carried it alone to the room that would be prepared to receive the first women. Her firm steps showed not only physical exhaustion but renewed inner strength. I destroyed much of what we inherited, Mother, he said, as he arranged the pieces into neat piles. Now I want to build something that goes far beyond us. I felt my eyes well up. The woman before me was no longer the lost daughter who had once rejected me. She was someone reborn, ready to lead with humility. One quiet morning, I watched Veronica through the half-open door. She was sitting on the bedroom floor, surrounded by boxes, patiently folding donated clothes. She sang softly, almost absent-mindedly, as if each gesture were an act of devotion. My heart sank. It was impossible not to remember the little girl who ran around the beach house with disheveled hair, begging her father to hold her. So many years had passed, so many wrong choices had been made, and yet there she was, rebuilding herself piece by piece. I closed my eyes and took a deep breath. I felt a peace I hadn't experienced in a long time. For the first time since Roberto's death, I realized my mission was being fulfilled. I had promised to care for our daughter, and I did. Not by shielding her from every pain, but by letting her learn from it. Not by offering shortcuts, but by allowing her to walk the path, even if it was rough. When Veronica looked up and found me at the door, she smiled simply. Everything is getting ready, Mother. Soon we will be able to welcome the first women. I nodded, swallowing back my emotion. I'm sure it will be a place of hope, daughter. In that moment, I understood that what we had built together was far greater than any inheritance. It was the certainty that, finally, my daughter had found meaning, and I, peace. The following weekend, we returned to the beach house with some boxes already packed. There were still no women sheltered, but Veronica insisted, we need to open this space, Mom. Even if it's just the two of us. I spent the day with her, making beds, hanging new curtains, and organizing the kitchen. By dusk, the house seemed to breathe again, full of colors and simple scents. Veronica brought 2 candles and placed them on the living room table. We have no plaques, no ceremony, but that's enough. Today a new story begins. We lit the candles in silence. The flickering flame reflected in her teary eyes. She took my hands and said, her voice trembling, Mom, I used to destroy everything I touched. Now I want to be someone who builds, my chest filled with emotion, and you're already building it, daughter. More than a shelter, you're giving hope back to this house. And to yourself. We stood there in silence, watching the candles burn slowly. It wasn't a grand inauguration, but it was symbolic, a rite of rebirth. At that moment, I was certain that the doors of that house would not only shelter vulnerable women, but also a new version of ourselves. 2 weeks later, the first women arrived at the shelter. There were 3 of them. A young mother with a baby in her arms, a silent woman who barely looked up from the floor, and a frightened teenager who looked like she'd escaped from a nightmare. Veronica stood frozen in the doorway for a few seconds. I saw the fear in her eyes. The weight of responsibility, the reflection of herself in those broken stories. I approached her and whispered, "They don't need perfection, daughter. They just need someone who sees them as people." Veronica took a deep breath, shrugged her shoulders, and opened the door. "Welcome. This is your home now." As we helped the mother place the baby in the makeshift crib, I noticed Veronica's hands trembling. But at the same time, she smiled with a tenderness I hadn't seen in decades. In the evening, when everyone was settled, she sat next to me on the terrace. "Mom, I'm scared." "What if I fail?" "Then you'll try again." Making mistakes is part of the process, but giving up isn't. She rested her head on my shoulder, just like when she was a little girl. "I want to be worthy of their trust." "And yours. You already are, daughter." The simple fact that you care is the first step. We stood there, listening to the sea. And I understood that, just like those women, Veronica had also found refuge in that house. The following days were a silent ordeal for Veronica. The women at the shelter brought with them heavy pain, cries in the early morning, suffocated silences, unexpected crises. At first, my daughter just watched, lost as to how to act. But little by little, she began to find her place. She made coffee early, helped with the shopping, and listened to stories without interrupting. One afternoon, the lady who had barely looked up since she arrived asked her, "Can you teach me how to sew again?" My hands still remember, but my head has forgotten. I saw the surprise on Veronica's face. She brought a needle, thread, and a piece of old cloth. They sat together on the porch, and for the first time, I heard a light laugh escape the previously quiet woman. "I don't teach anything special, Mom," Veronica said later, embarrassed, "but that's exactly what makes the difference." The simple gesture of being present. Gradually, other women began seeking her out. The young woman with a baby asked how to make porridge. The teenager asked for help with her schoolwork. Veronica, once so fragile, now walked through the shelter with firm steps. She was no longer the daughter who had betrayed me out of greed, but someone who was finally beginning to earn respect, not for her money, but for her dedication. That night, as I watched her naturally clear the dishes from the table, I felt that the house was transforming not only those women, but also my own daughter. The first conflict soon arose. The teenager, named Luara, began to resent the shelter's rules. She didn't accept the schedule, fought with her young mother, and one night, almost escaped through the window. Veronica found her in the backyard. Already with her backpack on her back. "Where are you going at this hour?" he asked firmly, but without shouting, "It's none of your business." Luara retorted, her eyes filled with anger and fear at the same time. I watched from inside the kitchen, holding my breath. This was the test my daughter had to face. "Of course it's my business," Veronica said, approaching slowly. "You're under our roof. If anything happens to you out there, I'd never forgive myself." The girl hesitated, holding her backpack to her chest as if it were a shield. "I don't need anyone. I've always managed on my own." "Alone?" Veronica knelt before her. "Then why are your eyes crying out for help now?" The words hung in the air. Luara tried to respond, but burst into tears, dropping her backpack on the floor. Veronica hugged her without another word. And in that moment, I saw, clearly, the transformation. My daughter wasn't just someone seeking redemption. She was learning to be the safe haven she once ceased to be for me. When she came back inside, she looked at me tiredly, but with a sparkle in her eyes. "Mom, I think for the first time I felt like I was doing something right." "And it is, daughter. It is exactly where it should be." After that night in the backyard, something changed in the shelter. Luara, previously aloof, began following Veronica around like a shadow. She asked about simple recipes, helped fold clothes, and even laughed from time to time. The other women noticed the change and began to look at my daughter with more trust. She was no longer just the lady of the house's daughter, but someone who truly cared. One morning, the young mother panicked because her baby had a fever. Before I could get up, Veronica had already grabbed a towel, prepared warm water, and calmed the baby in her arms. "Breathe, Mariana, everything will be okay," he said. While giving simple instructions, with the calm of someone who always knew what to do, Mariana looked at her as if she had found an older sister. Later, the sewing lady said softly to me, "Your daughter has steady hands and a light heart." "That combination is rare," I smiled, holding back tears. I knew how much Veronica had had to lose to achieve that lightness. That night, at dinner, they all laughed together at a story Luara had told. It was the first time the shelter felt like a real home, and I, sitting at the table, understood that Veronica was not only being accepted, but was becoming a silent leader, conquered by surrender and not by imposition. The tranquility of the shelter did not last long. One rainy afternoon, Jonas called me. His voice was filled with caution. "Mrs. Helena, I received information about Ricardo. He tried to file a lawsuit here, even though he was imprisoned in France." My stomach turned cold. "What kind of process?" "He claims to have rights to certain assets that, in reality, never belonged to him. He's trying to challenge old documents." I looked at Veronica, who was playing with Mariana's baby in the backyard. My heart sank. I knew this news could shatter their newfound peace. "Don't tell her anything yet, Jonas. I want to understand exactly what this means." "Don't worry, I'm already taking care of it. But I thought it was important to let you know." I hung up the phone and remained motionless, watching the scene in the backyard. Veronica was laughing, a light laugh I hadn't seen in a long time. How could I tell her that Ricardo's shadow still haunted our lives? That night, she noticed my silence. "Mom, did something happen?" "Just tired, daughter," I lied, forcing a smile. She didn't insist, but her eyes betrayed her suspicion. I went to bed later, unable to sleep. The shelter was flourishing, my daughter was being reborn. And yet, the past kept knocking at the door. Veronica discovered the truth by chance. She was organizing some paperwork from the shelter when she found, among forgotten correspondence, an official letter addressed to me. "Mom, what is this?" he asked, entering the room with the envelope open. I felt the blood drain from my face. The letter bore the court stamp and mentioned Ricardo's name in cold letters. I tried to take it from her hands, but it was too late. "He hasn't given up on us yet, has he?" Her voice was shaky, her eyes welling up. I sighed deeply, feeling the weight of the truth. "Yes, daughter. He's trying to claim what never belonged to him. Jonas is taking care of that." Veronica left the envelope on the table and began to pace back and forth, like a caged beast. "I should have known. He never accepts losing. He always finds a way to come back." "Veronica," I called softly. "That doesn't mean he'll make it." She sat down, burying her face in her hands. "Mom, I was just starting to breathe again. And now I feel like he's still holding me, even from afar." I touched his shoulder. "He only has the power you allow, daughter. Here inside, he no longer rules." She looked at me silently, tears streaming down her face. And in that moment, I realized, this battle wouldn't just be legal. It would also be internal. The next day, Veronica made an unexpected decision. She came into my room early, her eyes still red from a bad night's sleep, but with a determination I'd rarely seen in her. "Mom, I won't let Ricardo control me anymore. Not from here, not from anywhere. I want to face him," she said, her voice breaking but confident. "Daughter, the lawyers are already taking care of." I began. "I'm not just talking about the court," she interrupted. "I'm talking about myself. I need to prove that I'm no longer its prisoner." He spent the entire day at the shelter, but this time it was different. He painted walls, repaired windows, and rearranged cabinets. Every hammer blow, every brushstroke seemed like a way to banish Ricardo's ghost from his life. At night, he gathered the other women in the living room. "I know that each of you has someone or something that tried to steal your dignity," she began, her voice trembling but firm. "Because today I have decided that I will no longer be held hostage by my past. I want this place to be proof that no man, no pain, no mistake can define who we are forever." The silence was broken by timid, then growing applause. Even Luara, the most resistant, stood up and hugged her. When everyone dispersed, Veronica came to me. "I don't know if I can beat Ricardo on paper, but I've already beaten him within myself. He no longer defines me." I kissed her forehead with tears in my eyes. "And that, daughter, is the greatest victory you could achieve." The following weeks were dominated by the case against Ricardo. Jonas came to the shelter frequently, bringing stacks of documents and news from the court. "He's trying to claim that some of the assets were acquired with his own money," he explained in one of the meetings. "But the evidence of fraud is clear. We have statements, forged signatures, even testimonies." Veronica listened silently, but I could feel the tension in her intertwined fingers. Every time Ricardo's name was mentioned, her shoulders stiffened. Despite this, she didn't let fear paralyze her actions. As the process progressed, she dedicated herself to the shelter even more fervently. She organized sewing workshops with the elderly woman, helped Mariana get the baby's documents in order, and even accompanied Luara to an interview at the local school. "If Ricardo wants to take me down, he'll find me stronger than ever," he said one night, as he folded the sheets. Not just for me, but for all of them. The preliminary hearing took place on a rainy morning. Jonas arrived wet, his umbrella dripping, but with a smile on his face. "We have a partial victory." The judge acknowledged the initial fraud. Ricardo lost his attempt to freeze the properties. Veronica closed her eyes and sighed, as if lifting a stone from her chest. "This is just the beginning, isn't it?" "Yes, but it's already a huge step," assured Jonas. That night, as I watched the women at the shelter eat their dinner peacefully, I realized the legal battle wasn't just about property. It was about getting my daughter back to herself. Ricardo's response was not long in coming. A few days after the partial victory, anonymous messages began circulating on social media defaming the shelter. They accused Veronica of using the women as a front to enrich herself, claiming donations were being embezzled, and that nothing was transparent. The first few times, she tried to ignore it. But when Mariana came crying, saying that neighbors had made cruel comments at the market, I realized the situation was escalating. "Mom, it's him. I know it's him." Veronica trembled as she held her phone, the screen full of insults. "He may be in prison, but he can still destroy me." I held his hands. "He's just trying to get to you because he knows he's losing." These lies don't stand the test of time. But for her it wasn't that simple. What if the women believe? What if they give up on this shelter? I saw the fear of old return to his eyes. The same fear Ricardo had always known how to instill. "Daughter," he said firmly. "The truth always finds a way to rise up. And so does your strength. You don't need to prove anything to those who don't know your story. You just need to keep doing what's right." That night, Veronica cried quietly in her room. But at dawn, she got up early, made breakfast for everyone, and announced, "If they want to silence us with lies, we will respond with actions. Today we are organizing a community fair, open to everyone. You will see for yourself who we are." It was the first time she faced Ricardo not only within herself, but in front of the world. The community fair was organized in less than a week. Veronica threw herself into the work with an energy I'd never seen in her before. They set up tents in the shelter's backyard, sewing by the elderly woman, bread and cakes prepared by Mariana, simple crafts created by Luara. Even the neighborhood children showed up to help decorate the gate with colorful ribbons. On the day of the event, the entire street came to a standstill. Curious onlookers, neighbors, merchants, and even local authorities came. At first, I noticed suspicious glances and low whispers. But soon the aroma of fresh coffee, the laughter of the women, and the authenticity of the stories began to break down the barriers. Veronica walked from one tent to another, explaining the shelter's work, listening to questions, and presenting each woman as the protagonist of her own story. Her posture was firm, but her smile held a sweetness that won everyone over. A local newspaper reporter asked for an interview. "What motivated you to create this space?" Veronica took a deep breath and answered without hesitation, because I myself needed refuge one day. And I learned that no one should face pain alone. The article came out 2 days later, with vibrant photos and glowing words. Instead of false accusations, the shelter was seen as an example of resilience and solidarity. That night, when we closed the doors exhausted, Veronica hugged me tightly. "Mom, for the first time I feel like Ricardo's past doesn't matter anymore. What matters is what we're building here." And I knew she was right. The fair's success echoed more than we expected. Within days, the shelter's phone was ringing off the hook. Local businesses offered donations, an NGO proposed a partnership, and even the city government sent a letter of recognition. Veronica seemed to float with each new piece of news, but I also noticed the weight growing on her shoulders. "Mom, what if we can't handle it?" she asked one night, exhausted after another day of meetings. "What if this is all bigger than me? Then you'll learn to grow together." "Daughter," I replied, touching her hand. "It's not about controlling everything, but about taking firm steps, one at a time." A few days later, an unexpected visitor arrived, a renowned lawyer, sent by an international foundation. "We've heard about your work," she said, walking through the shelter with a watchful eye. "We're interested in funding projects that truly transform lives." Veronica listened attentively, but hesitated when the woman mentioned the need for reports, goals, and audits. "I don't know if I can handle so much responsibility," he murmured, after the visitor left. He smiled tenderly. "Daughter, remember when you could barely face yourself? Look where you are now." Responsibility is just a reflection of the trust they're placing in you. She took a deep breath, lifting her chin. "Then I'll accept. But I'll do it my way, without losing the soul of this place." At that moment, I realized the shelter was no longer just a refuge. It was becoming an institution. And my daughter, without realizing it, a true leader. With visibility came pressure. The newspaper that had praised the fair published a second article, this time questioning whether the shelter had sufficient infrastructure to handle so many women. Some local politicians insinuated that Veronica was taking advantage of the cause to gain prestige. "I should have known," he muttered, dropping the newspaper on the table. "The bigger we get, the more they want to attack us. That's a sign you're bothering someone, daughter," I replied calmly. "No one wastes energy criticizing something that doesn't matter." Despite my words, I could tell the insecurity was creeping back into her. In meetings, her voice would sometimes crack. At night, she took longer to fall asleep, walking around the shelter in silence as if carrying the weight of all the walls on her shoulders. One night, Luara found her sitting on the terrace, her eyes lost in the sea. "You can't give up, Mrs. Veronica," the girl said with unexpected seriousness. "If you fall, we fall with you." Veronica looked at her in surprise, then smiled with tears in her eyes. "Thank you, Luara." I think I needed to hear that. The next day, he called a meeting with all the women in the shelter. "They'll try to bring us down, spread lies, weaken us. But this place doesn't exist to please neighbors or politicians. It exists to save lives. And as long as you believe that, nothing and no one will stop us." The words echoed loudly through the room. And in that moment, I realized, the criticism wasn't diminishing her. On the contrary, it was shaping her resilience. It didn't take long for external criticism to be used against us. Jonas arrived at the shelter with a frown, carrying a folder of documents. I received a new notification from Ricardo's lawyers, he said, placing the papers on the table. They're trying to use the negative reports to claim the shelter is a front for embezzlement. Veronica's eyes widened, indignant. This is absurd. The women who live here are proof that this work is real. I know, Jonas replied calmly. But in justice, my dear, the immediate truth doesn't always matter. What matters is what they can prove or insinuate. Veronica began to pace back and forth, biting her lips. He's locked up, Mom, but he can still haunt me. It's like I never left. I approached her and held her hands. He's not just chasing you, he's trying to cling to anything to keep from sinking completely. That's desperation. Jonas nodded. Fortunately, we have solid documents, testimonies, and even transparent donation records. But it will be a grueling process. That night, Veronica confided in me, her voice low in the darkness. Mom, sometimes I think that the only way to free myself from Ricardo is to prove, in front of everyone, that I am stronger than him. You've already proven it, daughter, I replied, stroking her hair. You just need to believe in yourself. The next morning, Veronica woke up with a different energy. If you want to accuse me of deviance, I'll show you exactly the opposite, he said, already making coffee. Let's open the shelter doors once and for all. No secrets. No doubts. She organized weekly meetings open to the community, published simple expense reports, and even created a whiteboard in the hallway with daily notes on incoming and outgoing funds. The women themselves helped update the records, feeling part of the process. At first, some neighbors looked at them suspiciously, but they soon realized the seriousness of the initiative. The elderly woman, who had returned to sewing, proudly showed off her pieces, explaining that all the money raised would go to the collective fund. One afternoon, reporters showed up unannounced. Veronica didn't hide, she welcomed everyone, showed them the kitchen and the bedrooms, and shared stories respectfully. Without exposing anyone, the truth does not fear transparency, he said, looking directly at the camera. The next day, the headlines changed their tone. Abrigo responds to criticism with an example of honesty and solidarity. That evening, as I was collecting the chairs after another open meeting, Veronica smiled at me. I think I unintentionally turned the accusations into fuel. That's how you win, daughter, I replied proudly. It's not by shouting louder, it's by living in such a way that lies have no place. And I realized that Ricardo, even from afar, had just lost another battle. With this new wave of recognition, volunteers began to appear from all over. Some young students offered tutoring. Women willing to teach cooking, even a retired doctor who wanted to provide weekly consultations. Veronica received each one with gratitude, but also with caution. Not everyone who approaches us has good intentions, Mom, he confided once, as he reviewed a stack of files. We need help, but we can't risk their safety. The concern was well-founded. Among the volunteers was a soft-spoken man who introduced himself as a financial advisor. He offered to organize donations, create sophisticated reports, and open specific accounts. It all seemed far too generous. I don't know, Veronica said, frowning after their first meeting. He talks nicely, but something doesn't convince me. Instinct is rarely wrong, I replied. Your father used to say that easy promises always cost a lot. In the following days, Veronica decided to observe rather than act. She discovered that the consultant was discreetly pressuring some women, trying to obtain personal information in exchange for extra help. Without hesitation, he called him for a conversation. Nobody exploits anyone here, she said firmly, looking him in the eye. If your intentions aren't transparent, the door is right there. He left, disgruntled. But as I watched her defend the shelter, I saw the transformation. Veronica was no longer the fragile daughter who had once allowed herself to be manipulated. She was a guardian. The hardest test did not come from outside, but from within. One morning, Veronica realized that some of the money raised at the last fair had disappeared. We searched drawers, folders, and envelopes, but found nothing. A heavy silence hung over the shelter. At the end of the day, the truth came out. Luara, the teenager Veronica had taken in the backyard weeks earlier, tearfully confessed, I took it. I just wanted to help my brother. He was starving. Veronica paled. The entire shelter seemed to hold its breath. Why didn't you ask? He asked in a choked voice. We would have helped, Luara. There was no need to steal, the girl sobbed, clutching her backpack. I thought they wouldn't believe me. Every time I asked for help before, they just called me a liar. The silence was broken by Mariana, who approached and placed her hand on the girl's shoulder. No one here will call you a liar. But you need to learn to trust. I saw the conflict in Veronica's eyes, anger at the broken trust and compassion for the hidden pain. She took a deep breath, then spoke firmly, Luara, the money will be returned. You will own up to your mistake and make amends. But know this place won't abandon you because of this. The other women nodded silently. That night, while everyone was asleep, Veronica approached me, exhausted. Mom, how difficult it is to be responsible for other people's fate. It's difficult, daughter. But that's exactly what makes you a true leader. The episode with Luara left marks, but also seeds. In the following days, Veronica gathered all the women together to talk. They sat in a circle in the common room, without papers, without formalities. This place isn't meant to be perfect, she began, her voice firm but gentle. It's meant for us to learn together, even from our mistakes. Luara, huddled in the corner, barely looked up. Until Veronica called her gently, do you want to tell everyone what happened? The girl took a deep breath, swallowed her tears, and spoke, stuttering. In the end, no one judged her. Mariana even offered to share some of her wealth to help her brother. It was then that the sewing lady spoke, in a calm tone, when I arrived here, I thought I'd never be worth anything again. Today, I sew not only fabrics, but also my own wounds. If we can forgive myself, we can forgive Luara too. The words echoed in everyone's hearts. Veronica looked around, excited. So let's turn this mistake into a learning experience. From today on, all financial decisions will be collective. Nothing will be hidden away in drawers anymore. There was general agreement. And that night, I saw something new emerge in this shelter, a true community spirit. Veronica approached me afterwards, her eyes shining. "Mom, I think for the first time I feel like I'm not carrying this alone. Because it really doesn't, daughter. You built a home where everyone supports each other, and I realized that the shelter, once a fragile refuge, had now become a space for true reconstruction." The sense of unity was still fresh when Jonas appeared at the shelter's gate, his expression grave. I knew immediately, it was about Ricardo. In the room, with everyone gathered, he opened the document folder. We received a new subpoena. Ricardo filed an appeal, claiming that the shelter was funded with his own funds. Veronica's eyes widened. Doesn't he get tired? Even when he's in prison, he still tries to destroy us. Jonas sighed. The process is difficult, but not impossible. We'll need testimonies, detailed records, and community support. Upon hearing this, something surprising happened. Mariana raised her hand first. I'm going to testify. I want to tell you what I found here. Soon after, the sewing lady and even Luara volunteered. One by one, the women spoke up, saying they were willing to defend the shelter before any judge. Veronica was silent for a few seconds, her eyes filled with tears, until she spoke in a firm voice. Ricardo thought he had me alone, but now he's going to face us all. The room erupted in murmurs of support. That night, lying in bed, I reflected on the irony. The man who had tried to isolate my daughter was the same man who had unwittingly made her the leader of an entire community. The days leading up to the hearing were filled with constant tension. Jonas came almost every afternoon, reviewing paperwork, aligning strategies, and coaching Veronica and the other women for their testimony. The judge will try to confuse you, he warned. Answer only what you're asked. Be clear and direct. Veronica listened attentively, but I could hear her breathing quicken, her fingers tapping lightly on the table. At night, she walked around the shelter in silence. As if rehearsing invisible conversations, the day before, he gathered everyone in the common room. I know you're scared. I am too. But remember, it's not just about documents or property. It's about proving that this place is real, that we are real. Luara, with a hesitant voice, replied, Mrs. Veronica, when I came here, I didn't trust anyone. If I'm going to speak before a judge today, it's because I've learned to trust you. Emotion overwhelmed everyone. Mariana cried silently. The sewing lady held Veronica's hand tightly. That night, she lay down beside me, like she had as a child after a nightmare. Mom, what if I fail? What if the judge believes him? I hugged her and whispered. Daughter, even if the whole world doubts, the truth remains true. You have already won, just by standing. She fell asleep, exhausted, but with her head resting on my shoulder. And I, looking at the ceiling, silently asked Roberto to accompany us to that audience. We had already stepped in. The women from the shelter were there, each dressed simply, but with dignity written all over their faces. Veronica walked beside me in silence, but I could feel the tension in her steps. When we entered the room, the air seemed to freeze. Ricardo was there. Handcuffed, thin, but still with that arrogant look he always used to intimidate. For a moment, I noticed Veronica's breath hitch. I touched her hand, and she squeezed back, as if drawing strength from the contact. the judge began his proceedings. Ricardo's lawyers spoke at length, trying to paint the shelter as a cover, a scheme. Empty words, but delivered with conviction. Then it was Veronica's turn. She stood up slowly, her heart pounding so loudly it seemed to echo in the room. But when she began to speak, her voice was firm. This shelter wasn't born of money, nor of fraud. It was born of pain and hope. Every woman here today is living proof that we are not a facade. We are life rebuilt. Mariana testified next, then the sewing lady, and finally Luara, her voice trembling but courageous. Each testimony was like a brick, building a wall against Ricardo's lies. When the hearing ended, Veronica left the room with tears in her eyes, but not from fear. "Mom." I stared at him. And for the first time, I didn't feel like he had power over me. I hugged her tightly, my heart at peace, because he doesn't have it anymore, daughter. He never will. The days following the hearing were filled with agonizing anticipation. The judge had closed the session promising a swift decision, but each hour seemed to drag on like a weight. At the shelter, everyone tried to maintain their routine. The workshops continued, the children's laughter still filled the hallways, but tension hung in the air like a gray cloud about to rain. Veronica threw herself into work to hide it. She cleaned, organized, and helped Mariana with the baby, but at night she would find her sitting alone on the terrace, her eyes lost in the distance. "What if he succeeds, Mother?" he asked one of those nights. "What if all this is ripped away from us?" I hugged her tightly. "Daughter, we've already faced the hardest part, looking at him without lowering our heads. Whatever comes next is beyond our control." But the truth has deep roots. She took a deep breath, as if trying to believe, but couldn't quite believe it. Meanwhile, the women at the shelter prepared a surprise. They organized a small prayer circle and simple songs in the backyard, to bring strength and hope while we wait, the sewing lady explained, smiling. Veronica cried quietly that night, but not out of fear. She cried because, for the first time, she wasn't waiting alone, and as I watched everything, I realized that the judge's decision would be just one chapter. The greatest victory had already happened. My daughter was no longer a prisoner of the past. The news came one bright morning, when we least expected it. Jonas appeared at the shelter's gate with a briefcase under his arm and a restrained, almost solemn smile. "We have made our decision," he said as soon as he entered. Silence fell over the room. Veronica dropped the broom she was holding, the women approached, and even the children remained quiet, as if sensing the gravity of the moment. Jonas opened the folder slowly, letting the tension build. Then he read in a firm voice, "The judge rejected all of Ricardo's claims. He acknowledged the fraud and ruled that the shelter had no connection to illicit funds." He lost. For a moment, no one moved. Then Mariana let out a cry of joy, Luara clapped her hands, and the sewing lady began to cry with emotion. Veronica brought her hands to her face, trembling. She walked over to Jonas and asked, "Let me read it. I need to see it with my own eyes." He handed her the document. She scanned every line until the tears flowed freely. "It's over. Mom, it's over. He no longer has any power over us." I hugged her with all the strength I had. I felt the weight of years crumble from her shoulders, like chains finally breaking. That day, the shelter didn't just celebrate a legal victory. We celebrated Veronica's final release, and the rebirth of all of us. After the court victory, something changed. The shelter no longer felt like just a shelter, it was now a symbol of resistance, a beacon for many women who were previously afraid to even ask for help. Stories began appearing in local newspapers. People came to the gate, some bringing donations, others just to say thank you. I saw Veronica blush when they called her shelter director, but her eyes shone with a confidence that had previously been absent. "It's not about me, it's about all of us," she would repeat whenever someone tried to make her a hero. "What we do here is only possible because we believe in it together." Still, I sensed something different about her. She walked upright, with firm steps, as if she had finally discovered her place in the world. The other women listened to her attentively, seeking her guidance, and she no longer hesitated to offer advice, to welcome, to make decisions. On the balcony, on a silent afternoon, she said to me, "Mom, for years I thought strength meant having money, status, someone powerful by my side. Now I know strength is being able to look back, see my mistakes, and still keep moving forward." I held her hand and smiled. The shelter was growing, but what truly blossomed before me was my daughter. Over time, the shelter went from being just a welcoming home to taking on the form of an institution. Jonas, ever helpful, helped officially register the space as an association. Paperwork, signatures, and meetings followed, bureaucracy that had previously exhausted me, but now signified solidity and a future. The city government expressed its support. A counselor visited the site, promising funds and sending social workers to help. Some local businesses offered partnerships, donating food, clothing, and even vocational training. The women, previously cowering in their own pain, now actively participated in decision-making. We created a small internal council. Each woman had a say in the direction of the shelter, from kitchen organization to psychological support programs. Veronica naturally assumed the role of coordinator. She spoke in public with a firm calm, without the arrogance of her past, but with the conviction of someone who knows pain and overcoming it. "This place isn't charity," he would always say when someone gave him a donation. "It's dignity. It's a new beginning," and more people wanted to be a part of it. The shelter had become not only a refuge, but also an example for the entire community. One rainy night, there was a knock on the door. When we opened it, we found a soaking wet young woman clutching a torn backpack to her chest. Her eyes were red, but not from the cold, from fear. "Can I stay here?" he asked in a barely audible voice. Veronica wrapped her in a blanket without asking any questions. She simply led her into the living room, offered her hot tea, and waited for the silence to give way to words. Her name was Camila. She had abandoned her husband days before, after years of humiliation and debts incurred in her name. As I listened to her story, I saw Veronica's expression harden, as if each sentence stirred an uncomfortable memory. Later, when everyone was gone, I found my daughter on the porch, staring at the rain. "Mom, it's like I saw myself arriving here months ago. Fragile, deceived, with nothing. She sighed. It's painful to realize, but it's also proof that I've truly changed. I hugged her silently. The past left scars, but it also brought strength. And now, Veronica had the chance to be for Camila what I had been for her, a safe haven. In the following days, Veronica took on a new mission, guiding Camila. Not with pre-planned speeches, but with simple gestures. She sat beside her during meals, helped organize her documents, and, above all, listened unhurriedly. "You're not to blame for what happened," he would say whenever the young woman blamed herself. Blame is the preferred weapon of those who manipulate. As he spoke, I saw in his eyes a reflection of pain and healing. It was as if, in teaching, he was also reaffirming his own transformation. One night, Camila burst into tears. "He still calls me. He says he'll find me, that he can't live without me." Veronica held his hand firmly. "I heard those words too one day. It wasn't love, it was prison." The silence that followed was heavy, but liberating. Camila wept for the present, and Veronica wept for the past that was finally no longer a burden. Meanwhile, the shelter continued to grow stronger. New volunteers arrived, some with similar stories. We organized sewing workshops, cooking classes, and even psychological support sessions. The energy in the house was different. Less pain, more hope. Veronica walked among them all with the confidence of someone who had earned not only respect but also trust. I watched her and thought, my daughter hadn't just rebuilt herself, she had become the cornerstone of this place. A local newspaper ran a special report on this shelter. The story highlighted the struggle of women who, together, had transformed suffering into strength. Veronica appeared in the main photo, with a serene smile. When I showed her the newspaper, she laughed awkwardly. "I never thought someone would write about me like that." "Because now you write your own story," I replied, and for the first time, she didn't look away or try to diminish herself. She just nodded, aware of what she had become. One afternoon, Camila was helping to hang clothes on the line when she said, "If it weren't for you, I would have gone back to him." Veronica stopped, looked at her tenderly and replied, "You don't owe me anything. You owe yourself for having the courage to stay." At that moment, I realized a cycle was closing. The one who had once been rescued was now the one doing the rescuing. The shelter had fulfilled its greatest mission, transforming victims into free and strong women. After the report, the shelter was no longer just known in the neighborhood. Groups from neighboring towns began calling for information. Some women arrived from far away, bringing only the clothes on their backs and a weary look. The phone rang nonstop. What was once an open-door house was becoming a regional landmark. With growth came difficulties. There were not enough beds, clothes, and resources for so many hungry mouths. Jonas warned, "We need a formal structure, or soon we won't be able to serve everyone." Veronica took a deep breath. "If before I faced debts and mistakes, now I can face papers and projects. This is the kind of struggle that's worth it." The residents organized themselves. Some sewed to sell, others baked bread and cakes. Everything went into small fundraisers. It wasn't much, but it represented more than just money. It was autonomy. Camila, the youngest of the group, excelled in helping teach basic computer skills. Her shy smile gradually transformed into confidence. The city government offered a room in the city center for classes, and local businesses donated furniture. The shelter was no longer seen as a place for the poor, but as a space for rebuilding. At a community meeting, an elderly man stood up and said, "These women teach us a lesson. Where many would only see ruins, they built a home." With so much visibility, Veronica began receiving invitations to speak. At first, she declined, feeling unsure. "I don't want to be seen as an example." But I encouraged her, "You don't speak out of vanity, you speak from experience. Your voice can prevent others from going down the same path." She thought, took a deep breath, and accepted the first invitation. I knew she was ready for something even bigger. The community hall was packed. Veronica trembled before taking the makeshift stage. But when she began to speak, her voice was firm. She told her story without embellishment: the losses, the debts, the manipulation, the abandonment. Then she spoke of starting over, of shelter, and of hope. The audience's silence was broken by long, emotional applause. Veronica, who once believed herself worthless, now inspired dozens of women. Her success didn't please everyone. Some men in town murmured that she was teaching rebellion to her wives. One woman commented to me at the market, "Your shelter is good, but some people think you want to destroy families." I smiled, but inside I felt the old shadow of prejudice. Veronica, upon hearing this, lifted her chin. "If family means prison to them, then let them learn a new meaning." After the first talk, invitations came from schools, churches, and associations. Veronica spoke not as a teacher, but as a survivor. Each word carried the power of experience. Camila accompanied her, helping with slides and notes. It was beautiful to see two generations supporting each other. Despite growing up, Veronica sometimes withdrew into silence. One night, I found her alone on the porch. "Mom, am I going too fast?" he asked. "What if I fail?" I caressed her hand. "He who has fallen and gotten up so many times need not fear falling. You have already proven your strength." The following week, Veronica was invited to represent the shelter at a regional meeting on women's protection policies. She wore a simple dress, but her demeanor was one of dignity. As I spoke before officials, I realized my daughter was no longer just a survivor. She was now a leader, a voice impossible to silence. As the shelter grew and Veronica's visibility grew, pressure also mounted. Some politicians wanted to use the cause to promote themselves, while conservative groups criticized it, saying that women were being taught to disobey. Jonas warned us, "The more you grow, the more you will have to deal with outside interests." But not all was resistance. A district judge, moved by the story of one of the sheltered women, made a point of visiting the shelter. Upon meeting Veronica, she said, "What you do here is worth more than any sentence. If you need anything, count on me." That alliance brought security and legal respect to our work. The shelter was officially recognized as a regional support center. Funds were provided to expand the rooms, hire psychologists, and open a small professional training room. Veronica spent days planning the expansion. Her energy seemed inexhaustible, as if each brick she built was also a reparation for her own past. One afternoon, I watched from afar as Veronica led a meeting with volunteers and city officials. She spoke clearly, delegated tasks, and welcomed suggestions. I felt a lump in my throat. This wasn't the same daughter who had once stolen me to pursue her dreams. She was a whole woman, who transformed her own pain into a beacon. At night, however, I found her exhausted. "Mom, sometimes I feel like I'm carrying the world on my shoulders. What if I can't handle it?" I hugged her and replied, "The weight you feel isn't failure, it's importance. Only those who build something real know this burden." She took a deep breath and smiled, still tired, but lighter. An email arrived one Monday morning. It was from a renowned university, inviting Veronica to tell her story at a national conference on human rights. She read the message 3 times in disbelief. "Mom, they want us to speak." Her teary eyes were not of fear, but of amazement. At the conference, hundreds of people listened in absolute silence as Veronica recounted her journey, from naivete, through deception, to reconstruction. When she finished, they gave a standing ovation. In that moment, I realized her voice had transcended the shelter walls. She spoke not only for herself, but for all those who had once been silenced. The impact was immense. Other cities wanted to replicate our shelter model. We received visits from delegations, NGOs, and even federal government representatives. The space that began with bare walls was now seen as a national landmark. And at the heart of this movement was Veronica, firm, yet humble. One calm evening, we sat on the porch. Just the two of us. She looked at me seriously. "Mom, for a long time I saw you only as someone to save me. Today I understand. You never wanted to be a savior. You wanted to be a mirror." I held his hand and replied, "And you, daughter, have become what was always inside you." We embraced, without tears this time. It was a mature, definitive reunion. Months later, we opened a new wing of the shelter. The sign at the entrance read, "Casa Aurora, where new beginnings flourish." Veronica spoke, "This is not the story of one woman, but of many. It is not the victory of one family, but of all who refused to remain silent." Applauded once more, she smiled at me from the crowd. And I knew, the journey had reached its true destination. Time passed, and the house that was once born out of pain became a lighthouse. Women arrived in silence, and left with voices. Veronica, previously lost in fragile illusions, now walked upright, with the steps of someone who knows who she is. I, who feared losing her forever, found not only my daughter, but a companion in the struggle. The sea in front of the old beach house still holds the echoes of Roberto. I know that, wherever he is, he smiles. Our family didn't break up, it just reinvented itself. And in the glow of the windows of Casa Aurora, each new flame rekindles this certainty: true love does not save by force, but teaches how to save oneself throughout life.